our dining tables. That is what we want to talk about tonight. Hello, good evening, and welcome to Agenda. My name is Beatrice Adu, and following last week's revelation and that evidence we brought to you that indeed food items coming from Galamsey-infested areas are filled with dangerous heavy metals, we are here today to tell you the solutions, to give you information as to whether or not there are scientific, political, or even agricultural solutions to dealing with this menace and how you can reduce perhaps the toxicity in food items that you buy and eventually cook. I do have on the panel with me Dr. Osei-Botre. He's senior lecturer and head of department at the Marine and Fisheries Sciences University of Ghana, Legon. Good evening to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
I also do have on my right side Dr. Carl Osei. He's Programs Manager, Occupational and Environmental Health Program, Ghana Health Service. Good evening to you as well, Doc. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
Of course, we do have our video call. Bismako Wusunate, he's Programs Officer, Peasant Farmers Association. Good evening to you, sir. Thank you as well for joining us. Okay, we can't hear.
Good evening, and thank you for having me. Just a point of correction, I'm the Acting Executive Director. Thank you.
Acting Executive Director. Thank you so much, sir. And of course, we'll also be joined via video call as well by Dr. Abu Sakara Foster. He's an agronomist and political activist. Thank you as well for joining us. And let me remind you that we're streaming live on 3FM 92.7. Send us your comments and we'll read them back to you. I was just telling you that last week we brought you that report that confirmed that indeed some items that we get on our farms, cassava, plantain, contomere, garden eggs, among others, are filled with heavy metals. In case you could not join us last week, well, you could go back to watch the program, but we've got snippets of what we brought to you last week just before we start the conversation. Watch this.
Heavy metals were analyzed in the laboratory, and then the food crops that were brought to the laboratory were plantain, cassava, contomere, garden eggs, pepper. So after our analysis and we found the various concentration, we also subjected it to permissible limits or guideline values. And so we chose WHO/FAO, which is the World Health Organization Food and Agriculture Organization limits, as well as EU limits.
The results are shocking. Food items have heavy metals far elevated above what is permitted, causing serious health implications, including brain damage and other related neuro diseases, nervous breakdown, among others, especially in children.
Manganese recorded higher values, and these values were in contomere, they were above 1, and their units for adults were 1.14 and 2.01 respectively. However, for children, it was higher in contomere and garden eggs, and their values are 1.23 and 1.03 respectively. Then also we calculated for mercury, which is the target hazard quotient, and that one was also higher in cassava for both adults and a child, and they were 1.77 and 1.90 respectively. The next calculation or model we subjected it to is called health index, and then the health index is supposed to be the adding all multiple elements that you have analyzed together. And when you also sum them up, it shouldn't be above 1. But when we did a summation of copper, lead, zinc, manganese, and mercury, all of them were higher than 1. They were in the range of 2 to 4, which means they were higher than 1.
It's heartbreaking, it's heart-rendering to see what is going on in terms of quantum of these heavy metals that our food is laced with. Hitherto, we have been showing things about the turbidity of the water in our river body, so the water is like tea or it's like Milo. But beyond that, it's also in the food that we are eating. And you see, in nutrition, there's something we call vitamins. So we say, with vitamins, you need them in very little amount. It's the same thing with what we call trace elements or trace metals. There are elements that we also need them in very small quantities. So something like, the body needs a little bit of magnesium, a little bit of zinc, even iron that is supposed to help our blood in terms of increasing our blood level or our hemoglobin is even needed in a certain amount. Beyond a certain amount, iron becomes poisonous. So you have iron toxicity, something we call hemochromatosis or hemosiderosis. All these things can come up. Now, looking at the levels of or quantity in terms of how much of these things are in our foods, it becomes alarming that in the hospitals these days, recently we were discussing as doctors, we are seeing too many young people coming with strokes. Under 40s, they are coming with strokes. This morning, I've seen a young 36. It was like, I don't know why my blood pressure is 171. Today, I've seen a young person with kidney failure. Now, we are sitting in Accra. We think that we are on the periphery, but it is something that is global. It's nationwide.
And you just watched the snippets of what transpired last week. And like I told you, today we're going into the solutions and what can be done to mitigate the impact of poisonous metals in our foods. Is there a way out? And I want to come to you first, Dr. Benjamin Oseboche, Senior Lecturer in Head, Department of Marine and Fisheries Sciences, University of Ghana. Ghana is not the only country mining, and I mean, that's a fact. What are the other countries really doing to ensure that there is food safety in the midst of mining to get, you know, what they need?
Thank you very much, and good evening to our cherished viewers. Yes, Ghana is not the only country into mining. Around the world, mining companies are beginning to adopt what we call global sustainability standards. So these standards are meant to ensure that the companies are reducing emissions, for example, and then waste that are generated from the mining activities. They are also trying to manage the use of water. So you don't use lots of water in the process. And then also the tailings that are generated, they are also trying to take care of it so that it does not have any harmful effect on the environment and then on human health. They are ensuring worker safety and then also engaging the community in all the activities that they do. People are also adopting cleaner production technologies. That will also ensure that, for example, you reduce the carbon emission. And they are also monitoring, real-time monitoring, using drone technologies and so on, remote sensing, to ensure that whatever is happening in these mining areas, in real time, they can have an idea of what is happening. And if there is a cause for mitigating any activity, they can swiftly do that. And
that's what you think we are not doing, because the last time I checked, China was #1 globally in producing gold as of 2024, and Ghana, yes, we are #1 in Africa. So these are the things you say that we are not doing, which is why we are where we are.
Yes, and it's obvious. I mean, people, it's not well regulated. This kind of mining activity is not well regulated. It's only become evident when we saw the coloration of the waters down from upstream to the ocean. That is when we all got alerted and then realized that no, something must be done. But they will not get to this point. If you look at other countries, apart from China, South Africa, Tanzania, Zambia, Australia, all these countries are putting in measures to control the hazardous impact.
And of course, the environment and the circumstances of these countries, including Ghana, are different. So we'll go into what is peculiar to us and what perhaps we could do to ensure that we deal with the situation. But I'm coming to you, Dr. Abu Sakara Foster. I know that you have gone through the report, which we kind of teased out in that details that we brought to our viewers last week. You've gone through it. As an agronomist, I'm just wondering what you make of the content of that report that you've seen yourself.
I think the first point is that the report itself clearly says that with regard to toxicity of heavy metals in food crops, which it names a number of them, cassava, plantain, vegetables, and also some of the other root crops, it is clear that overall, the levels of toxicity, except for lead, were not beyond the tolerable levels as far as WHO, FAO standards were concerned, although they were above the tolerable levels where the EU standards were concerned. That is lead in particular. Now, that does not mean to say that, we are clear and all dry. No, not at all, because first of all, you have to examine the scope of the study. Where did these crops come from? Were they location specific, etc.? To get an idea. They said food crops. Does that mean cassava all over Ghana? Or
Atiwa West, to be specific, in the eastern region.
So essentially, if you are an exporter wanting to buy cassava from Ghana, and they tell you that Atiwa West has toxicity of this amount, are you to assume that the whole cassava in the whole country has that? No. So I think we have to put this into context with broader studies that give us a general scope of the level of toxicity, its level of incidence, and spatial distribution, so that we can formulate particular measures to try and mitigate or contain this increasing levels of toxicity. That is one point. The other point is that we mustn't overly focus, although our attention has been drawn to mining, we mustn't overly focus on mining alone, because the most highest toxicity we have now is in lead. And the highest source of lead toxicity is in the emissions of cars in cities. So we have to look at those aspects as well in a more comprehensive way, and not just focus on the mining areas alone. Yes, it is true that in as far as the mining areas, the toxicity is location specific, and it is in waterborne bodies, etc. You need to take specific measures, and I think I already heard one of the participants talking about taking best practice measures, global standards. Yes, those need to be put in place, and I must say that we must commend the government for its level of seriousness on the Galamsey since it came into power, because now it is granted that officials in charge of stopping this, when they work, nobody is going to stop them. They're going to encourage them, as opposed to what happened before when people took excavators and they got sacked from their jobs. I think that is a very clear signal that we need clear direction from the top, which is unopposed to say that we must stop this, and then we all work to stop this, and that people don't get punished for doing the right thing. So it is a good change, but having said that, that alone is not enough. We have to set the standards, set the mechanisms in place, and ensure that the policy is enforced broad scale.
Indeed. And let me ask you this quick question before I go to Mr. Bismarck Owusu there. Having studied the report, aside from the bit about political will, which you're praising this current government for, what goes through your mind as regards what might have contributed to how far we've come down the drain when it comes to chemicals in our foods?
I think, first of all, we have a number of sources of toxicity of those heavy metals. We have agricultural use of pesticides and fertilizers, etc., which, truthfully speaking, is not really that high as a source of these heavy metals in soils, because the amount of it used, 20 kilograms per hectare, with a limited percentage of the land being fertilized, is not of the scale that should trouble us at this stage. But having said that, we need to look at imported foods as well, because there's another study that looks at imported spices. And there's quite high levels of toxicity in those imported spices, which we add to our food as well. So this is basically what I'm saying. We must take a comprehensive look. We must look at them, go to the market, sample all the things that are there, a number of markets around the country, both imported and local, And then when we go to an area, if we're looking at the soil as the source of the toxicity, we must take enough samples for it to be representative not only for a location, but for a soil type and a soil series, etc. And then also particular plants. That involves a lot of money. And I have to be honest with you, I'm not sure that EPA alone can do that job. That is where now we have to say to companies which are in certain areas, you have to bear part of the corporate social responsibility for ensuring that the standards of toxicity are maintained and enforced. In which case, certain amounts of samples that are taken, they should pay for it, for the analysis, because it's a lot of work and it's a lot of cost. So in essence, we should have participation from the private sector in the areas of operation to ensure that the standards are being met. If we leave it only on the public bodies, it will be too heavy a burden for them to bear, bearing in mind that they are not well resourced in the first place. The other issue, which I think is also important, and it's a policy issue, going forward, we've already seen how with the initiative, with the gold board, those amounts of gold that are normally smuggled out of the country have now become part of mainstream so much that they have even strengthened the CD. A percentage of that should be taken for reclamation efforts, so that as indeed this CD is strengthening, then too the reclamation activities in the areas will also be strengthening, because a certain amount of revenue from that, a portion, will be put aside to support this work of independent parties, NGOs, etc., EPA, assisting EPA to monitor the levels in water, soil, plants, crops, take samples in markets, have the analysis, so that it is broadly shared and the information is widely available for everybody. So this is another area where a policy intervention, putting aside a percentage of the revenue, can also help us ensure that the enforcement is carried out. So broadly speaking, I believe we have the expertise in-house, in-country, to be able to contain this. But we have to deploy them to work, and we have to empower them to work. And the policy framework must be such that they are rewarded for pointing out where excesses occur, where enforcement is not being done, not that they get disincentives and punished when because some big people are involved and they're supposed to keep quiet. We are done with that chapter, we hope, and we're moving into a new chapter now where we will all do the right thing to support the right thing to be done, and it's very good to see that happening.
And thank you very much, Doc. I'll come back to you. But I want to take the preliminary thought as well of Bismarck Owusu-Nortey, Acting Executive Director of the Peasant Farmers Association. I know that, illegal mining activities in the eastern, western, as well as even some parts of the northern region. Are you able to paint a picture for us to what extent you have had a number of your farms invaded by these activities, first of all? Hello, Mr. Nortey, are you with us?
Yes, good evening, and thank you for having me. And I must say a big good evening to my colleagues on the panel. I think that, first of all, let me commend TV3 for coming out with such reports regarding how there is pollution once of our food due to the activities of illegal mining. The peasant farmers have been very consistent when it comes to how illegal mining is affecting our farming systems. And it'll be very clear as to the different levels at which galamsey activities that are not being controlled is affecting the activities of our members. First of all, we already know that the galamsey has led to the destruction of a lot of our farmlands. In fact, at our last count, we're talking of over 750,000 hectares of lands that have been destroyed by illegal mining. Then we also know about the water bodies that have been polluted. And the fact that if you go to a lot of the mining areas, you realize that farms that are located near these mining areas, the farmers are unable to use the water that are close to the farms just because those waters have been heavily polluted and they are unfit for agricultural purposes. On top of that, because of the, if you want, the profitable nature of the galamsey, you have a lot of the youths who are supposed to be either in school or in mining, in school or in farming. You see they rather move to do illegal mining. So all these factors have had a very devastating effect on the work that we do, on the income of our members, and even on the future of agriculture. So for this report to come and complement what we've been already talking about, the fact that the quality of our food is now compromised because of the possible contamination by these chemicals, for us, I think it's very worrying. Even though I would say we are not surprised, but I would say that we are extremely worried about the situation. It has made it quite difficult because there are some areas where now farmers and traders of particular food crops are unable to tell you where their food is coming from because there is the fear that when they mention to you that their food is coming from district A or district B, and that district is known for illegal mining, those particular food crops might not be patronized. So there's that legitimate fear of farmers or traders who do sell or produce food from those particular areas. And I think that's very, very much concerning. And again,
and if you could be wrapping up for me so I can come to Doc from the Ghana Health Service here.
Right. Again, so let me just wrap up. If you also observe, apart from the fact that the farmers now have to deal with the contamination, we are also dealing with other challenges. So we are dealing with post-harvest losses. We are dealing with aflatoxin contamination. Dr. Sakara talked about the residuals from chemicals. And on top of that, we have to battle with this. So it means that if there is no drastic action that is taken, it will get to a point, the youth that we are losing, we might even lose more. The clarion call for people to join farming or to also be involved in agriculture, we might lose that because gradually it's going to become lucrative because the food we are producing, we cannot even verify whether that food is of high quality or not. So for me, I think that this opens the opportunity or the door for us to further put more pressure on government to heed to some of the proposals that CSOs and other groups have been making regarding a placement of ban and some key measures to be taken to curb illegal mining activities, especially in areas or activities that are connected to agriculture and to farming.
And I'm coming to you now, Dr. Carlos. Say, you're with the Ghana Health Service. Have these issues come to your attention, and what are you doing about it? Because you are looking at solutions here.
Thank you, and good evening to your viewers. Yes, I think we've been collaborating, my unit, closely with those in the environment sector, the EPA, Minerals Commission, and so on. We are aware that mercury releases into the environment or emissions into the environment are creating serious public health problems. Not only, this example tells us that the problem is not only restricted to mining communities, but it can even go beyond mining communities. And over the years, I know we have developed National Action Plan within the context of the Minamata Convention to see how we can reduce these emissions of mercury into the environment. But this shows that so far we have failed to really implement the plan or be effective in implementing the plan. And I think it also shows that as far as enforcement is concerned, enforcement of our regulations, etc., is concerned, it has not then been effective Because how does the mercury get into the food chain? There must be a source. We know the source is illegal mining. How does it get from the illegal mining processes or sites into our food chain? We have regulatory authorities that are supposed to manage all this. But I know they are also constrained.
Okay, so before you talk about the other regulatory authorities, I want to stick with the Ghana Health Service because that's where you're coming from.
Yes.
Currently, as we speak, and with the intensified campaign to get this problem solved, what project is the Ghana Health Service currently doing or undertaking to ensure that you help in your own part to deal with the problem? What are you doing?
Oh, within the Ghana Health Service, before I come to Ghana Health Service, I think we should also try to get Food and Drugs Authority involved in this. Because when you're talking about the food chain, I think they have a critical role carrying out market service, etc., to ascertain the level of some of these pollutants in our food chain. You know, we are all under the health sector. But with regards to Ghana Health Service, we have a very huge workforce, community level all the way to national level. In the hospitals, we have clinicians, public health workers in the community. We can contribute a lot to awareness raising. It's a very important role that I think we can play. Raising awareness about this problem, not only in the communities, but also among the miners. They also need to know, and then also the health workers themselves.
Fantastic, you can. I'm not hearing you say that we are. What are you doing? That's the question I asked you. What are you doing to help deal with the problem as we speak, as Ghana Health Service, from your department?
So, like I was saying, what we will do...
So you haven't done anything. What you will do? You're thinking of what you will do?
That's what, we haven't... Actually, this is the first time you are telling me about the seriousness of this issue. And it's coming to my attention. But as I'm saying, as a health sector, we have agencies that are primarily responsible for handling such issues. And within the Ghana Health Service, I've talked about the fact that apart from providing treatments for all these things, which is late, prevention is the most important thing. And for prevention, we talk about primary prevention, which involves awareness raising, and for people to know about the problem. Because if they know about the problem, then they may be able to modify their behavior to be able to avoid also the exposure. So that is going to be very key. But I cannot say that we have a program now organized, but we have been working over the years with the EPA in the past. As I said, we have a plan, but I must admit, the plan, funding for implementation has always been a challenge for all of us. And so we have also challenges.
Okay, so let me ask you my last question before I go back to Dr. Abu Sakara and then the rest of the panel. You're saying we will, we can. When should we expect the Ghana Health Service to now start implementing what you're saying you will and can?
Thank you. So we will have to look for support, I believe. I believe that to do some of these things sustainably, you know, we need to work within systems that can fund themselves. You know, Ghana Health Service, we provide service. We are not really regulatory authority. Yes. So we we need always to work with partners because we don't really generate any funds. So to do something like this, you will definitely need some partnership if Ghana Health Service is going to be involved. And I think the problem is even beyond Ghana, just Ghana Health Service. But this is an environmental health issue. And you also know that environmental health, right now, there's some fragmentation. We have them in the Ministry of Local Government, and they used to be under the ministry. And so we have to look at the wider problem. What strategy do we have to adopt to be able to effectively deal with this program, using the right
I want to come,
officers.
I want to come back to you, Dr. Abu Sakara, before I get the view of the rest of the panel members as well. Listening to Dr. Osei here, I'm just wondering whether you're convinced that indeed, aside from your earlier commendation of the government, the institutions that are supposed to be working together are really doing so to ensure we find a lasting solution to this. Let me first ask you that.
Well, the commendation was for waking up to the reality of the situation and trying to at least get the enforcement agencies working. However, if we're talking of a permanent long-term solution, we are still a ways away from that. And that does not rely on one particular institution or sector doing or not doing what it should do. What you need to do is put in place a frameworks. This is how it works. At the causative level, that's to say the source of pollution, mining, agriculture wastes, medical wastes, also pollution, air pollution from vehicles, and other areas, industrial wastes, etc. You have to have a framework that captures those sources of pollution and sets a regulatory framework that says no limits of that, and if you exceed it, it will be punished. And then you have to have a body that monitors that and punishes them for doing it and rewards them for doing it. Then you need to have, on the user's side, to be able to detect where it has gone into the food chain, a sampling across our markets, both in the rural and urban areas for local and imported foods, to be able to determine whether the levels of toxicity are being exceeded or not. This is not a one-day activity. It is a permanent thing that keeps going on, so that any time that there's an excess, you can trace it back to where it came from and take the corrective measures. And of course, the institutions that will do that, the EPA together with the Food and Drugs Board and the local governments, they all have their role to play in it. But it is within the ambit of a policy framework within which you assign all the institutions their roles and also their functions, and ensure that they have the capacity to fund those functions. And also on the money generating side, you find ways of taking some of the revenue to support them. If you don't do that, you won't be able to get a system that works. So we're talking here about a system. We're not talking about an individual intervention or an individual activity or an individual organization. It has to be comprehensive. They have to work together within that policy framework, everybody doing what they're supposed to do going forward. And this is what we need now to put together and get people working, but also have the means by which we can support them to work. We certainly have all the institutions, and I think that we have the academic people in the universities who can help. We need to get the people in the industries supporting us more. And where the small-scale miners are concerned, the government policy to structure small-scale mining needs to happen. Because you imagine this, if you have a football field the size of Accra, and they say that, look, there are allotments, 1 acre each, and everybody should go and take an allotment where they want it, and we all mine, and then later on we'll try and do the reclamation. It will be spatially distributed everywhere. But if they say that, no, we in local AMA here, we are allowing this first quarter to be mined and everybody should be in there. And when you finish this, we're taking some of your revenue, we give it to a third party to do the reclamation, and you move on to the next section. Then that way you make your problem more manageable.
I'm glad you talk about, please land. Doc, you are trying to conclude on your thoughts. You mentioned the source. I just wanted you to land before I come in.
No, so I think that all I'm saying basically is that we need to take different measures at the causal effects and the end user effects and in between the institutions within a comprehensive policy framework and make sure everybody does their part. And we need to ensure that they have the resources to do it. And since we're dealing, where mining is concerned, with something that has high value in currency, we can take a portion of it and structure the activity in the communities in such a way that we can actually clean up after ourselves.
I'm glad you talk about cleaning up our land. Last week, we had Dr. Hannah Bisiu, who is with the Minerals Development Fund in studio. And before we wrapped up our conversation, one of the things she mentioned was that her office, together with a private entity in Ghana, they were working on getting chemicals that were less harmful in using in terms of mining. I'm just wondering what information you have on such and how you think in the meantime we could use these to help mitigate the impact of these poisonous substances as we speak.
Yeah, I think the thing is twofold. First of all, yes, you can't get materials other than mercury because there are different processes of getting the gold out, mechanical processes, chemical processes, etc., magnetic processes. So some of these processes you can only use when you have a structured engagement. You can't use it at the small scale level where everybody is doing their own individual thing. But if you structure it in such a way that you are getting the gold out or getting the value out of the soil at a particular location, then you can use those methods because you can invest in the equipment and you charge everybody a little, But if you allow everybody to be doing their own thing, then it's difficult to have that kind of process. In addition to that, when you have also organized these people into cooperatives, as the government is now proposing should be done, you can control the areas in which they are at any particular time. And then also you can have a centralized buyer who will take some of the revenue for you so that we can give it to a third party to either go and fill the holes, find plants that absorb the heavy metals and take them out of the soil, and also even treat the water before it goes back into the rivers. But all of this you cannot do when everybody is doing their own thing everywhere. You have to have structure first. So the Ministry of Lands and Mining also has a role to play in ensuring that the medium-scale cooperative model is put in place and is enforced. We are not saying that nobody should do small-scale mining, but it can be done within the context of a more organized framework in which there are economies of scale for using methods and equipments that are more environmentally friendly.
And I want to come to you now, Dr. Osei Botwe, because, and this is a question that was asked by some of our viewers last week, asking how do we get these metals out of our foods? Is there a way to process these metals from the raw foods when you get them from the farms? Let me ask that first.
Thank you very much. Currently, metals by their nature, once they contaminate food sources, it's difficult to eliminate them by any means. So that is why it becomes an issue, because once they get in there, they may end up either in humans or animals that consume them.
So, okay, so let me ask the question in a different way. Can detoxification remove the poison? How do we do it and with what? Beyond what you said. And that is coming from Pauline Abrakwa on YouTube.
Thank you very much. So the detoxification process itself, we have some that is biological. When the chemical has entered your system, then you can, naturally the liver works to detoxify the system. So when we take in toxins, we have the liver trying to excrete some of these toxins out of the body. But you were asking about the food itself, detoxifying the food before consumption. Yes, that is where the challenge is. Yes, but the natural body itself. And then we have some boosters that we take in to help to detoxify our bodies.
Okay.
But even that will depend upon the very nature of the toxic, the toxin that is in your system.
So two things. When you say boosters, what exactly are you talking about?
Okay, so when I say boosters, it means that there are some, for example, drinks from herbs that you take in and then they facilitate the removal of toxins from your body. I cannot mention any specific herb, but then sometimes you even come across them labeled on the markets and so on, detoxifier and all that, yes.
All right, and I want to come to you, Bismarck Owusu Norte. I know you're with the Peasant Farmers Association, and earlier you talked about how widespread this is and how worrying it is for you as well. I'm just wondering, from where you sit, whether there's any sort of education going on for farmers in such areas, and what sort of education is even going on to ensure that, at least on your part as well, you're able to do something about this. Mr. Owusu Norte, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that there's been a lot of efforts by several groups, including farmer groups like ourselves, civil society, NGOs across the country to try and educate a lot of not only farmers but community people regarding the effects of galamsey on even the quality of food. Even though I must say that in some areas there appears to be some understanding, in some areas there are a lot of pushbacks. In fact, there are several areas where a lot of farmers are even afraid to speak up for fear of abuse or fear of victimization, either by the landowners or by the traditional authorities. So those kind of situations sometimes makes it a bit difficult for some farmers or some groups to completely curb this particular situation. Now, for us, I think that we also believe in the prevention is better than cure. Because if you look at the respective regions where the galamsey activities are quite common or dominant, these are the regions that produces a lot of some of the staple foods that we consume in a country. If you take a commodity like maize, if you check the figures from the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, the top 5 regions producing maize include the Ashanti, Eastern, and even the Bono regions. If you come to cassava, the top 5 includes Eastern and Ashanti region. If you come to yam, the top 5 includes Ashanti region. If you come to cocoyam, the top 5 includes Ashanti, Western, North, Eastern. If you come to plantain, Ashanti, Western. So you realize that the key regions that are critical for producing this food for us are the same regions where these galamsey activities is quite endemic. So for us, whilst we are also doing our best to get our members to understand that there's value in production in agriculture other than mining, you understand that there are also factors that are beyond the means of the farmer. There are instances where some farmers are migrants. They are not indigenous from the land. So when they have lands to do the agriculture, when an offer comes from a big-time miner, the land is forcibly taken from them and given to the miner to do their mines. In some instances too, you have your mine, your farm, very close to where mine activities are done. And that's where sometimes this contamination comes in. So for us, if we are very deliberate and very conscious about our agriculture and about our food, I think that this should be a matter of utmost importance to government. Recently, I heard that the president mentioned that he is considering formulating a legislation to criminalize the destruction of cocoa farms. And I was wondering why we didn't add food crops to it. Because in as much as we know the value we get from cocoa through export, we should understand that we need to survive and eat before we can produce cocoa. So the food crops are important. So what laws or legislation do we have to protect the food crops that are being produced in the country, to protect the quality of food crops that are being consumed by Ghanaians and even exported? So for me, whilst I agree perfectly with my senior colleague, Dr. Sakara, that there needs to be a holistic approach in handling this thing, I think that the priority should be given to agriculture and the food that you consume. We can't be in a country where we are exposed to several havocs, and then the quality of food also becomes a major issue. So if you ask me, I think that whilst we are contemplating legislating against the destruction of cocoa farms, I think as a matter of urgency, we should also be thinking about legislating against the destruction of farmlands, especially for illegal resource mining. And this one doesn't include only galamsey, but sand winning, clay mining, and other things that are affecting a lot of farmers across the country. Also, I think that if you recently, we also heard that to curb illegal gold smuggling, they've inaugurated a task force to do that. And I also wonder, so when are we going to get a task force that's also going to protect our agriculture and our farming systems? Because the farming system now is suffering from a lot of shocks. We have our climate shock that we are dealing with. We have the weather crisis that we are dealing with. Now we have illegal mining, sand winning, clay mining, all trying to affect and limit our work as farmers. So I think that though we are looking at all these nice task forces and interventions to protect our gold and protect our cocoa, I don't think that we should leave the food crops behind, because as I said, that is critical for the survival of as a nation.
And I want to come to you. I want to come back to you, Dr. Abu Sakara Foster. We've had the examples given by Mr. Bismarck Owusu Norte. And he mentions which areas are endemic with illegal mining. These are the same areas that we are having our food crops coming from. In the meantime, can we just find some of these areas and say that there's a policy which prevents food items from there from getting onto the market? Is it possible to do that whilst we try to deal with the overall policies that should deal with this problem?
Well, if you were to do that, you'd collapse the food markets in those areas. And of course, the livelihoods of those farmers who are there, who are not necessarily involved in illegal mining, but are just farming, would be endangered. And that is why we have to look at it in two ways. I think the first point is that, yes, as I can't overemphasize this enough, when you have the cause of the problem, it is better to address that one, which causes the majority of the problem, and rather than dealing with its effects further down the chain after it has gone past you. So yes, we need to put in place not only the regulations for how to handle chemicals, clean, materials, etc., in mining, but also we need to organize the mining sector itself to ensure that we can use better methods and also have a means of controlling the wastes and that come out of it, both the water and the soil pollution, after it has happened or before it has happened. Now, when we are talking about this toxicity in food, it would be misleading to concentrate only in the mining areas, because in the mining areas we're concerned primarily with mercury and arsenic toxicity. But there is a bigger problem, which is lead toxicity. that is not necessarily associated with mining areas, but it's more to do with the pollution from cars and also the fact that we are still grinding corn in small mills. And those small mills are scattered all over the place. Everybody buys their small bowl of corn, 18 kilograms, and you take it to the mill and they grind it for you. Before you came there, they may have been grinding groundnuts or pepper. So what do? They pour water inside to clean it. And when they pour water inside to clean it, they will then start grinding your corn. But what happens is that that metal rusts. And when it rusts, you get iron filings. And that is a huge problem now in most of the flowers, the peppers, and the maize flour that is produced. And it's affecting people's kidneys, it's affecting people's lungs. I have a pathologist friend who told me that in the pathologist, you see the color of people's livers. You'll be shocked because of this iron toxicity. Now, how do we cope with this? You can cope with it by making sure that the maize is centrally milled and sold in packets only. They do this in East Africa, and I don't know why we can't do it here in Ghana. Everybody has to grind their own bowl of maize and stand in the queue. What they do is that in the areas where maize is produced, they have large silos. Everybody sells the maize there, and then they have mills. And those mills mill the maize to standards.
And if you could be wrapping up for us, Doc, I'm sorry.
Home,
if you could kindly be wrapping up for us, so I can take the final words of other panelists in the studio.
So centralizing food processing and having measures in place will also help us a great deal. I think that we can leave it at here, but if we're talking about toxicity, it shouldn't be in isolation. Okay.
It shouldn't be in isolation. Thank you very much, Dr. Abu Sakara Foster, agronomist and political activist. And I'll be coming to you, gentlemen, here for your final thoughts. But let me read some of your comments back to you. Senor Aja says, human activities contribute most to these emissions. Paulina Abrakwa, I think I read your message earlier, thanking us for the topic and also your question about how to get rid of toxins from food. Again, we have Zigma saying, can't understand how this is not an urgent situation. Zigma again says, the fierce urgency of now. Kelly says, not to be rude, but I don't think these people are ready to do something about the situation. And I will read one more, and all of you are commenting. I'm reading from YouTube now. Zigma says, will there be posterity? And if not commercial farming, all are affected. Stop the menace. I'm coming to Facebook, and I do have some of you commenting. Okay, Michael Enipa asking that agenda is made to air from Monday to Friday, and there is Nana Yao Yok. And this is the last comment I'm reading before I take your last words here. Good evening, TV3 Ghana. If all the submissions made with health implications be summarized and played in the local dialect with explanation to those communities using the information centers, that would help. Let me come to you, Doc, for your final word.
Thank you very much. So the situation that we are faced with now is a very serious one. We know the effects of mercury, but we should also learn from our mistakes. You asked an important question. How did we get here in the first place? If we had put structures in place to ensure that we didn't get here, that would have helped us. The use of our space, we have a concept called spatial planning, where you cannot just do anything anywhere because you can do it. So we must have a place for mining. We said, okay, for mining, this is the area.
And if you could wrap up in just 30 seconds.
Yeah, this is the area that we need to mine. And that would help us. We should also be able to face the problem head on. If we need to, for example, stop people from consuming food that we know that they are contaminated, we need to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm coming to you, Dr. Osei.
Okay, thank you. I would just say that simply that we need enforcement. enforcement of our laws. We have a lot of regulations. Unfortunately, it seems we are getting to a point where if we are not careful, we may even have to issue out public advisory on the quantity of certain foods that you'll be able to consume, because I think where we are getting to, we are losing control.
Where we are getting to, we are losing control. Thank you very much, Dr. Carlos Say, Program Manager, Occupational Environmental Health Program, Ghana Health Service. We've also had on my left hand Dr. Benjamin Osebotre, Senior Lecturer and Head, Department of Marine and Fisheries Sciences, University of Ghana, Legon. Of course, we've had with us as well via video call agronomist and political activist Dr. Abu Sakara Foster, and we've had as well Bismarck Owusu-Norte, Acting Executive Director of the Peasant Farmers Association. Thank you so much for joining us on Agenda tonight. My name is Beatrice Adu. Join us again next week.